Some hungers cannot be stayed by bread alone, and some passengers carry a void that only your living flesh can fill. The neon lights of Seattle were a blurred smear of electric blue and sickly yellow as Ethan Vance guided his motorbike through the rain-slicked outskirts. It was 2 a.m., the hour when the world feels thin and brittle. His shift at the warehouse had been grueling, leaving his bones aching and his mind foggy. As he hit a desolate stretch of Highway 101, shrouded by the oppressive shadows of the Olympic National Forest, his headlights caught a figure. A woman stood by the guardrail. She wore a tattered white sundress that seemed to glow with an unnatural, bioluminescent pallor against the charcoal night. Ethan slowed down. He wasn't a hero, but the sight of a lone woman in the middle of nowhere triggered a sense of misplaced chivalry. As he pulled over, the engine's idle sounded like a dying beast's rattle. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice cracking. She didn't speak. She simply nodded. As she climbed onto the back of the bike, a foul odor hit him. The scent of wet earth mixed with something copper-sweet, like pennies soaking in old blood. Her skin, where it touched his jacket, felt like ice wrapped in wet parchment. Her face was hidden by a curtain of matted, black hair that seemed to writhe independently of the wind. As they rode, the atmosphere shifted. Ethan began to notice passing cars, truckers and late-night commuters, staring at him with expressions of pure, unadulterated terror. They weren't looking at him. They were looking behind him. A woman in a minivan covered her child's eyes, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream. Ethan felt a strange tugging on his left shoulder. It started as a dull pinch, then a rhythmic, wet crunching sound, like a shovel breaking through frozen gravel. He was too numb, too tired to process it. He thought it was just the wind whistling through his gear. He didn't feel the teeth yet. He didn't feel his leather jacket being shredded like wet paper. The silence of the night was shattered by the roar of an air horn. A massive Peterbilt truck swung into Ethan's lane, its high beams blinding him. The driver wasn't swerving. He was aiming. Crash. The world spun into a chaotic kaleidoscope of metal and sparks. Ethan felt the bike fly from under him. As he skidded across the asphalt, his last vision before the darkness took him was the truck driver jumping out of his cab, a flare in one hand and a heavy tire iron in the other, screaming at something that was hovering over Ethan's prone body, something that looked less like a woman and more like a disjointed, pale spider with an unhinged jaw. Ethan woke up 3 days later in a sterile hospital room in Tacoma. The air smelled of bleach, but beneath it, he could still taste that copper-sweet rot. His left arm was a mountain of bandages, throbbing with a heartbeat of its own. When the doctor arrived, his face was ashen. "You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Vance. That truck driver, he claims he saw a beast on your back. He hit you on purpose to knock it off." "What happened to my arm?" Ethan whispered. The doctor hesitated. "It wasn't the crash, Ethan. The trauma team. They found human bite marks. Deep ones. Whoever was behind you didn't just bite you. They were systematically consuming you. They had eaten through the deltoid muscle down to the humerus bone while you were still riding. The nerves were so traumatized they just shut down. You were being eaten alive, and you didn't even scream." The police told him the woman had vanished. No footprints in the mud, no blood trail except his own. She had simply evaporated into the rain. A week later, Ethan was back in his apartment, a cramped third-floor unit in an old brick building. The silence was his enemy. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard it. The slurp of a tongue over raw meat, the snap of a tendon. The hallucinations began on the third night. He stood before the bathroom mirror, trying to change his bandages with one hand. As he peeled back the gauze to reveal the jagged, circular scars that looked like a lamprey's maw, he saw her in the reflection. She was standing in the bathtub behind him. Her dress was gone, revealing skin that was translucent and bruised. Her jaw was elongated, hanging down to her chest, lined with rows of needle-like teeth coated in a black, viscous bile. "Ethan," she hissed. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of wind through a ribcage. He spun around. The tub was empty. The shower curtain drifted lazily. He rushed to the sink to splash cold water on his face. He turned the faucet, but no water came. Instead, a thick, rhythmic thump-thump echoed in the pipes. Then, a dark, arterial red liquid began to ooze from the tap. It was warm. It carried the metallic stench of the highway. He watched in horror as the sink filled with blood, and within the crimson pool, he saw a severed human ear, his ear, floating like a piece of discarded gristle. Sleep became a gateway to hell. Ethan began to wake up with fresh scratches on his legs, always in sets of 5. The apartment began to change. The wallpaper seemed to pulse like a throat. One evening, as he sat in his recliner, he heard a sound from the kitchen. Crunch, snap, gulp. He walked toward the doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs. There, sitting on his kitchen table, was the woman. Her back was to him. She was hunched over something, her shoulders heaving with the effort of a feast. "Please," Ethan sobbed, "leave me alone." She turned her head 180 degrees, her neck cracking like dry kindling. Her eyes were gone, replaced by 2 pits of writhing maggots that glowed with a faint, necrotic green light. In her hands, she held a slab of raw, gray meat. With a sickening jolt of realization, Ethan looked down at his own bandaged arm. The bandages were soaked through. The meat in her hands was his own tricep, freshly harvested. "You gave me a lift," she gurgled, her mouth overflowing with his blood. "Now, you provide the journey's end." He ran for the door, but the floorboards turned into soft, spongy flesh under his feet. The walls began to bleed. He screamed, a sound that tore through his throat, but the woman just opened her maw wider, revealing a throat that stretched back into an infinite, screaming void. 2 weeks after the accident, the landlord of the Crestview Apartments called the police. Neighbors had complained of a smell, not of a corpse, but of a butcher shop left in the sun. When the officers kicked in the door to 3B, they braced themselves for a gore fest. But the apartment was pristine. The bed was made. The dishes were washed. The bathroom sink was bone dry and sparkling clean. There was no blood, no smell, and no sign of a struggle. Ethan's motorbike keys sat neatly on the counter next to his wallet and phone. But Ethan Vance was gone. They checked the security cameras. The footage showed Ethan entering his apartment 5 days prior, looking haggard and pale. He never stepped out again. There were no secret exits, no windows left open. The only thing the police found out of the ordinary was a small, handwritten note on the bedside table. It wasn't in Ethan's handwriting. It was written in a dark, brownish ink that turned out to be a mixture of bile and bone marrow. It simply said, "The feast was exquisite. Every morsel was cherished. There is nothing left to bury." To this day, the residents of the building claim that on rainy nights, you can hear a faint, rhythmic crunching sound coming from the walls of 3B. And if you listen very closely, you can hear a man's voice, thin and terrified, whispering a single word over and over again. "Please, I'm still alive, stop chewing." If this story gave you the chills and made you rethink picking up strangers, make sure to subscribe for more spine-chilling tales of the macabre. Have you ever felt like you weren't alone in your own home? Let us know your scariest encounters in the comments below. Stay safe and never look in the rearview mirror.